1986, a Pennsylvania company invented a product known as the club. Have people seen this before? Somewhat familiar? All right, oh yeah. Okay, and so the theory, you know the theory then, which was that, maybe it's not impenetrable, but it certainly makes my car much less attractive to thieves than all the other ones on the street. The problem is that that assumes that the thieves just want any old car. And it turns out that oftentimes they do want your car, and then they're going to try every option, every way to get in to see what they can do. They'll try all the doors, they'll try all the windows, they'll come through, and then they actually got through and discovered something interesting, which was that while the club itself was made of case-hardened steel, the steering wheel it's attached to was made of plastic that could be cut with scissors. And so this metaphor really illustrates how when you're subject to a targeted attack, you're going to find very, very creative solutions coming from the adversaries. They're going to try everything they can, and ultimately you need to really up your game to be able to defend against that. My name is Mark Risher. This is Gumi Kim. The two of us work at Google, and we work on, among other things, account security. And what we wanted to do today is to talk through a number of these more targeted, more persistent threats that we've been observing across our network, and all of the both automatic steps that we take to defend G Suite customers and Google customers from these problems, as well as additional steps that each of you can take if you are administering, managing, or running your own domains on these platforms. The hope is that by sharing this, you'll both get a better sense of what's already taking place, as well as come out with a specific set of steps that you can take Monday morning when you're back at your desk to ensure that yourselves, your users, and everyone you know are getting the absolute best protection against these more targeted, pernicious threats. We're going to go through 3 specific categories of threats that we've been observing and seeing out there, and that are representing really the most frequent ways that accounts end up getting compromised. The first, credentials. It's been in the news numerous times that credentials, that passwords, usernames, and additional information are getting leaked at record proportions. They're getting stolen and republished, and these present one big category of challenge. The second, very closely related, is phishing. This is using social engineering to deceive people into providing their information. And the third, closely related to that, is what's known as a man-in-the-middle attack, which is when an adversary intercepts, manipulates, and potentially relays information to impersonate the intended target. So to begin with credentials, we've done some interesting research on Google, and we released this paper a few months back. We used our Google search crawlers to index the whole web, as everyone knows, and we set it out there looking for passwords. What we found was somewhat disturbing. 3.3 billion unique username password pairs. Now, to point out, these were not stolen from Google itself. These were stolen from many, many other third-party repositories, but frequently a username is an email address, and many times that points to us. And unfortunately, as is illustrated by the yellow box, frequently the password that people use on this gaming site or Equifax site or what have you site ends up also being reused somewhere else. So we pulled together these 3.5 billion unique pairs and then did some analysis and found that at a minimum, passwords are reused 17% of the time. Anecdotally and qualitatively, we believe it is much higher. When we interview users, we find many, particularly when they're outside of a security-conscious mindset, do reuse them. But this ends up being a tremendous concern and a big challenge. Now, fortunately for Google and for G Suite users, we're able to proactively resecure those accounts. If we find the password out there in the wild, our teams around the world can quickly operate on that to secure the account again. But that does still mean that many other properties in the world are still vulnerable. And so that's where the rest of our protections kick into place. Now, first, I'm pleased to announce that we overwhelmingly do not allow someone in simply by knowing about a username and password. In fact, well over 99.9% of the time, even if an attacker knows a username, password, and the phone number, they're not able to get through to our systems. That's because we know that there's billions of these out there, and so we've built automatic defenses to ensure that users get protected. What does that look like? Well, what that looks like initially is frequently a hard deny. So if something looks risky, we continually adjust and monitor this on the server side, and we'll simply block the account from coming through. There is, however, an important trade-off. So the team that I work on is responsible both for keeping out the attackers, but also making sure that good users get in. It'd be easy if I only cared about one of those, and so that balance is tough. What we deal with in the middle is through a number of secondary challenges. So somebody does present the correct username and password, and we'll ask for additional information. Here's an example of some of those types of things that we challenge for. And what this does, probably quite obvious to this audience, is that enables our systems to take an extra step, an additional step in verifying who it is. Of course, the strongest way to do that is by relying on something that could not simply be stolen through one of these breaches, and we'll get to some more detail on that in a moment. So that's what we're automatically doing. We're continually adjusting this. We're blocking well over 99.9% of illegitimate attempts through our server-side defenses. But there are important steps that you all can take to make this less of a fair fight, to make it more secure for your users. The first is to provide us additional of those challenges. So as you saw in the previous slide, if we know a phone number, we can ask for a phone number. If we know a city, we can ask for a city. This represents something that we just rolled out very recently, which is an employee ID challenge, something specific for the G Suite users. It's a knowledge factor that most corporations make known within the employee base, but it's very seldom known outside. And so this can get combined with that dynamic risk-based authentication if and only if you upload that information into the systems. So that's another way, is by bolstering these types of challenges, then allows us to ask more questions when we have some doubt. A second step that helps, though, is that in order for us to do these challenges, we need to be in a flow where we can ask for subsequent or secondary confirmation. And unfortunately, a number of people have gone into the admin console for G Suite and have turned on this less secure apps option. Now, frequently this was done because they had an old piece of enterprise software, such as an email client, that needed to collect a username and password and did it through its own proprietary flow. Unfortunately, if you enable this switch, it basically lowers the defenses because it allows somebody who has one of these breach files, who knows usernames and passwords, to get through to the system. So we strongly, strongly recommend turning it off. And in fact, for most users and most enterprise use cases, it is no longer necessary. The one interesting fact on this slide is that all mail clients love the color blue. But there's a second fact, which is that for most modern mail clients, it's no longer necessary to turn on that or to enable those less secure apps, to limit yourself to just password-based authentication. For Microsoft Outlook, there's the G Suite Sync for Microsoft Outlook. If you're searching for that, you can search for GSSMO. And that enables you to do then these more robust challenges to get that additional protection, meaning that if somebody tries to impersonate one of your employees, they can be served a subsequent challenge and stopped at the door. And then on Thunderbird, iOS Mail, and Apple Mail, there's native OAuth support, which again opens a web view, just like a web browser. That means that when somebody illegitimate or in risky circumstances is trying to authenticate, they get stopped or challenged by additional information. So from that, this is how we're sort of stopping people at that front door. And now what we wanted to move to is, I guess, what happens afterwards and other ways people get attacked.
Okay. So Mark just gave some recommendations on things you can do to proactively protect yourself even further beyond our automatic protections. Definitely listen to his recommendations, because if you are part of a breach where your username and password credentials are stolen, you become 10 times more likely to be hijacked. Now, this number actually sounds pretty big and scary, but it's actually small potatoes compared to if you're a victim of a keylogger, and even worse if you are a victim of phishing. Phishing is one of the most effective ways that hijackers actually get to users. And once you're a victim of that, you're 500 times more likely to be hijacked. Now, an even more effective way is spearfishing. Spearfishing is where an email will target an individual specific user, and oftentimes it's going to use personal information to make that email look legitimate. And to actually prove how cunning some of these tricks can be, let's actually do a quiz to see whether you can tell the difference between spearfishing emails and legitimate emails. At Google, one of the things that we do a lot is we send security notifications to users. These security notifications are very effective in getting users to see if there's suspicious activity in their account, to read those emails, and to take action. So as you can imagine, these hijackers, they really want to imitate our emails and pretend that they're us, because they're going to get that engagement so that they can phish these users. Now, what you see on the screen here is an example of what we call a new device notification. This is when you log into a device for the first time that we have not seen before associated with your account. You've probably seen this on your personal accounts and elsewhere, because this is one of our most common notifications. Now, I want somebody to guess which one is the fake one and which one is the real one. So tell me which one's the fake one. Maybe come up to the mic and say why. Anybody, you come up to the mic. Let your neighbor through.
I think the left one is fake.
This one?
Yes.
Okay, tell me why.
Because of the from.
Oh, you're left, this one.
So it says via google.com. I don't know if that's easy to fake. I think that's pretty hard to fake. So I changed my mind. I think the left one is the right one.
You think the left one is what?
Is the true.
Okay.
And the right is the phishing one. Because the from is easy to change, and via is hard to change.
Okay.
That's my guess.
Okay. So you're actually wrong. That being said, because you were brave enough, I will give you a prize, which Mark will give you. So it actually turns out the left one is actually the fake one, and the right one is the real one. Now, this is really clever what the hijacker did. They basically took our exact email, and pixel for pixel, they copied every single element. And so for you, knowledgeable user that you are, even you can be tricked. They even took the profile picture of the user, and so you don't expect that from a phishing email, obviously. So, but the giveaway here actually is the email address, and what it says up here, it says Chrome updates, and it looks like a legitimate email. And again, regular users can't tell that that's not a real Google email. Okay. Now, it actually turns out that even though the hijacker went through a lot of trouble to exactly copy our template, that's very effective in tricking human users that this is a legitimate email. But ironically, that actually makes our automatic systems catch these even easier. What we're able to do is we can take this email template, load it into our systems, and so when we see people using these templates in their exact form, and those people aren't us, then we can tell that these are phishing emails and send them to spam.
It's worth noting that the one over there with Chrome OS
Uh-huh. Yeah, but that's the point. You get usually what happens is we want to notify users because if there is a hijacker who had logged into a Chrome OS from Bangkok, then you want to be able to see that so that you can go into your account and help secure it, right? Yeah. Right. But I think my point is a legitimate Google email will sometimes tell you if a hijacker actually tried to log in from Bangkok, we'll still send you an email that said they tried to log in from Bangkok.
One dimension that's happening here is they're trying to use fear and urgency to get you to lower your defenses. And so you see this, you say, I've never been in Bangkok and I've never had Chrome OS. That actually makes you less likely to carefully scrutinize the rest of the message and more likely to fall for whatever happens next.
Yeah.
The question there was, what is this via google.com up there in the from address? So this one is actually when it's being relayed through a message. So in some ways, it's an artifact of the screenshot we took, but point taken from this audience that we need to make much more clear what's going on up there. Via google.com in this case means that it was forwarded to our systems, and it's an artifact of that we chose a sample that we'd caught.
Yeah, so the normal user would just see the Chrome updates at googlechromupdates.com.
Correct.
Okay. So sorry, that was a bit of a trick for you. Okay, so as I mentioned before, that previous hijacker was using our exact template, and therefore we're able to catch it easily. Now, maybe about a year ago, we actually changed our template to be more kind of white and clean according to kind of material designs. And as you can guess, these hijackers actually quickly followed suit, and they started making fake emails that were also clean and white and looked a lot like ours. But in this example, the phisher didn't copy the email template exactly. And instead, they kind of copied elements of the overall look and feel. So what happens is to a user like you, you're going to say, yeah, that kind of looks like some Google emails that I've seen before. And it's harder for our systems then to detect this because the template isn't exactly the same. But again, on this one, somebody guess, which one is the fake one? You want to go to the mic?
Get your prize ready, and we'll explain what these are a little bit later.
The one on the left.
This left. Okay,
Yeah.
tell me why.
I don't believe in relays.
Excuse me?
And I mean, it's missing all the legal mumbo jumbo.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Yeah, so it actually turns out, yes, that is true. I think with someone less discerning, overall the email actually looks pretty good. There aren't any glaring typos. The formatting is good. Again, look and feel pretty much matches. And normally you wouldn't be able to tell, right? Again, if you look really closely maybe and knew that that email address wasn't ours, then you could tell. But honestly, that sounds pretty legitimate. In our system, however, one of the things that we can tell is, again, this looks like the overall look and feel of our email. And we also notice that there's a Google logo up there. And that Google logo is being sent from an email that's not one of our security email addresses. Now, in this example, what's going on is the hijacker is trying to be even sneakier. So they're not using our exact template, and they're even suspecting that when we look at the content of the email, certain words like Google may trip us up. And so they've purposely kind of tried to avoid using the word Google. I'm sorry, I'm kind of giving away the answer. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, okay, sorry. I'm giving this one away. So they purposely kind of misspelled the word Google here on the, it's your right. And even like the Google logo, it's a little bit fuzzed up, right? It's hard for you to see, but like it looks a little fuzzy to the computer, so it's not an exact match on the image. So again, to a human user, it's really hard to tell the difference. And in fact, a lot of people think that this first image on the left is the fake email when it's not. So they did a pretty good job here. Okay. So after going through all of these examples, if you're feeling pretty confident because you were able to spot the fake emails, I don't want you to be complacent because some of the tricks that these spearfishers are using actually are not detectable by the human eye. Here's another example where it's an email that looks like it's from the Chrome developer support that's going to a specific Chrome developer saying, hey, we need you to provide your postal address. Otherwise, we're going to suspend your account. So again, using the sense of urgency, it's asking users to go and fill out a form. Now, it actually turns out that, again, this email looks pretty normal. The content doesn't look suspicious. The sender's name and their email address all looks fine. But what the Google automatic system can see is that if you click on this link for form, it actually goes to a domain that was newly registered. In fact, it was probably set up right before that they sent this email campaign because they're doing this specifically to target you. So we can tell that and definitely send this to our suspicious folder. In this next example, this is something where we use something called homoglyph detection, where this email, again, looks perfectly normal to a user. It's asking, hey, you're running out of disk space. You need to go and up it. Pretty common scenario. But what's actually happening is, if you look at the word space, looks pretty normal to you, but there's something weird going on. The first four letters, SPAC, those are normal Roman characters, as you would expect. But this E that's in red is not the normal Roman E. It's actually a Cyrillic letter E, which looks like E, but it's not. And so to a human, that looks very normal to you. And then to an unsophisticated machine, it actually just looked like specie. And it wouldn't trip up any red flags if that was a suspicious word. Now, fortunately, in our system, we can tell that these are tricks that the fisher is trying to use. Now, in this last example, one of the things to note is that invoices is a very common method that spearfishers try to go and target users. They're going to say, invoices do, again, using that urgency to get you to open the email. Again, with this one, no human can tell what is wrong with this one. But it actually turns out that the word invoice is kind of a suspicious word. And so again, the fisher knows that we're analyzing the content, looking for suspicious words, and so they want to try to mask that. So what's really happening is they take the word invoice and they insert these tiny little characters. I put them in red for you to see, but normally you wouldn't be able to see because these they put in a 0-size font. So you cannot see them. Now, again, an unsophisticated machine would instead see this garble of letters, and they wouldn't be able to tell that this is an email that I have to flag for suspicious activity. Now, because Google does have a sophisticated automated system, we actually can tell that they're trying to say the word invoice and that they are trying to target the users. And again, we can flag this email as suspicious. Yep, okay. Now, if all of that, if all of that was interesting to you, like again, be comforted for the fact that we will do a lot to protect you automatically. But there are things that you can and you should do to actually take advantage of our most advanced phishing and malware tools. If you go to your admin console, go into the Apps section, G Suite, Gmail, and then Safety, you'll find a number of tools which I'll show you in a sec. The first area is around attachments. We want to make sure that if you're getting attachments that have scripts in it or encrypted attachments from untrusted senders, that we can actually flag these. Now, this setting is off by default. And the reason for that is because we understand that for you as administrators, you're trying to make a choice for your organization. There's, do I want to keep my users as safe as possible versus what is the potential for me to miss a legitimate email which is incorrectly flagged as suspicious. So obviously there's a trade-off there. So it's for you to go and choose that. But if you ask me, my recommendation is go in there and actually turn these on. The next area is around links and external images. For these, we actually felt so strongly about links behind shortened images and linked images that we turn these on automatically for everybody as of this past April. Okay. Now, I recommend that you still go into this tool and turn on the last setting, which is not turned on automatically, which is around getting UI warnings for clicks on untrusted domains. The third area is around spoofing and authentication. You want to make sure that emails that are coming into your org, that they're not impersonating your employees or your domain. Again, this is off by default, but my recommendation is you really should turn this on. Now, I keep saying, like, turn things on, and maybe some of you are still on the fence and feeling a little queasy, like, should I really turn these on? Well, it actually turns out that this is kind of a no-brainer. If you look at the UI here, we actually do have an option where you can get the best of both worlds. You can actually keep emails in the inbox and not send them to spam automatically, but you can also display a huge UI warning for users so that they don't become easily, they don't become easy victims to these phishers. This is an example of what that warning UI looks like. As you can see, it's just a big honkin' yellow banner. It's really hard to miss, you know. And as Google, we're being super opinionated and direct about what is really happening. We're saying, be careful with this message. We're explaining to the user what happens and kind of what they can do, and they can report this as phishing. We're being opinionated because we know that through our automated systems, we can kind of see the landscape of what's happening, and we can see signals and invisible tricks that isn't obvious to the naked eye. And so here you see a yellow notification, but depending on the situation, we also have red versions as well as gray versions. Now, my last recommendation to you is to actually use Gmail as your email client. The reason for this, one, those UI notifications that we just saw, you can only see it in the Gmail application. But there's also an added benefit. If you're on iPhone, we're able to send you security notifications through device notifications rather than relying on those emails, which are so easily phished. We've actually found that so far, phishers have not been employing that mechanism, and these device notifications are very effective in engaging with users in a couple of ways. One, we find that users actually go and read and interact with them 4 times more than they do on email. And when they do, they're reacting 7 times faster. And so that speed, as well as the rate of reading these messages, is super important when you're trying to stop a hijacker in their tracks and limit the damage that they're trying to do. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Yes, with Android, you actually don't need the Gmail app at all because Android is automatically already configured to receive device notifications. So it doesn't rely on you getting the app. Okay.
So Gumi talked a bunch about the ways that these dangerous links might get through to mailboxes, the ways that people might receive them and get deceived into clicking on them. What I wanted to do now is to talk a bit about what happens next. And to do that, we're going to illustrate and highlight what we really mean by a man-in-the-middle attack. This is something we, in security have talked about for quite some time, but we continue to find that it's difficult to comprehend, that it's been challenging before. So I wanted to walk through what you think is happening, what's often happening, and how this is getting exploited. When a user receives a link, whether through an email box such as the ones that Gumi was just showing, or through other communications channels, through Slack or through a messenger or through any product out there, what they're doing is they click on this link, and then they expect the web browser to serve up a page back to them. The user then looks at this page and tries to verify, much like the quiz we just did, is this the legitimate login page? Is this the resource I was looking for, or is it deceptive? If they believe it's correct, they then enter their credentials, typing a username and password, and they authenticate into the site. And the site may optionally then actually send back a challenge, such as an SMS code, as I spoke at the beginning. The user enters that into the page and is now successfully authenticated into the site. So that's what we expect to happen. That's what happens when you're clicking on a legitimate link and going to a legitimate site. Unfortunately, the weakest link here, actually, who wants to suggest which number is the weakest link of this process?
You get a prize.
Number 4, other guesses? 2, others? All right, so in my opinion, it is 2. It is that the human being, the user here, is the one who's making a judgment call on whether the site is legitimate or not. And doing just like we did with Gumi's exercise, oh, there should be more legal text, or the URL doesn't look quite right, or that picture is a little blurry. These are very subtle signals that phishers, and particularly in more sophisticated targeted attacks, these spear phishers know about, and they're getting better. They long ago realized that running a simple spell check dramatically improves your click-through rate, and now they're improving on templates, icons, imagery, etc. So what ends up happening in real life is that this is exploited by this man-in-the-middle. So an attacker serves up a fake site. Here we have Google.com. From a distance, maybe in the back of the room, it looks like it's right, but this first letter is actually not the G. The user looks at this site, and if that user fails that human verification, they end up entering their information into the site. The challenge is now the attacker can relay that directly onto the real site, and now what's happened, this sad user thinks that he entered his password into this site. He's now either authenticated or frequently will just be shown an error and asked to try again, whereas this scary individual on my left-hand side has now successfully logged into the real site. And unfortunately, this works even if the site then asks for additional challenges like another knowledge factor or a code sent to a cell phone. Now this, for a long time, we talked about as man-in-the-middle, and people assumed, oh, sure, but this guy's got to be awake, sitting there by the computer, ready to type it in. Unfortunately, it's not the case. And a few months ago, actually about a year ago now, somebody open sourced a proof of concept built on top of the popular Nginx reverse proxy open source that in real time serves up a pixel-perfect copy of a site and relays the information to the legitimate one. What this looks like is unfortunately, as with many of your examples, something that no human being could ever discern. So here is one of these pixel-perfect sites. The evil Nginx authors created some config files for a few popular domains, including Google, Outlook, Facebook, and others. And we've since stopped this on Google, but I was able to grab some screenshots beforehand. So in this, people can study. We don't have to do it as a quiz, though, because there really is nothing that you can see in the content area of the page. Did anybody see anything suspicious, anything alarming? Yep. Okay, so what the URL? That is the one piece, and what we've done here, actually Christian in the second row, registered accounts.google.com.https-com.tk. And that is true that for experts like you all, you realize is not legitimate, but most people, by the time they've gotten to the 20th or 25th character, they've kind of stopped reading. And by the way, things like HTTPS, I see that all the time. It seems like that's important, and so it doesn't seem bad. And worse, on small screens, whether it's toolbars encroaching or a mobile phone, there really is nothing that you can see at all. So what we're looking at here, this is unfortunately meant to scare you, is a pixel-perfect identical copy of the site that can be manipulated and that could do a real-time relay where you would happily type in whatever information this page asks you and end up logging into a fake site that's able to steal your information, and as Gumi said, then leads to a 500 times higher likelihood that you'll successfully get penetrated. So what do we do? First, automatic defenses. And the first one is that we work on something we call in-session risk detection. So it is important that we stop people at the front door wherever possible. And so Google's authentication systems work very hard on prevention. That is, stopping you up front with as many of the challenges and blocks that I've described so far as we possibly can. But we do still run a high availability system, and we need to allow people to get through. And so when somebody does slip through, we have a secondary line of defense, or lines of defense, where we look at detection. In the session as they progress through, what transpires, and do we want to keep the user in or not? So let's go through a hypothetical session. It begins with a user, where's it better for me to stand? Maybe on this side. Begins with a user logging in. So at 8:54, the user logs in. And our systems, those prevention systems, do detect an anomaly in the login. Maybe it's coming from a part of the world they haven't seen before. Maybe it's like the Chrome OS that this person asked didn't have. Maybe it's coming under suspicious circumstances from time or part of the network. We serve up a challenge, but the user passes the challenge. Again, this is how I mentioned before. Things like SMS one-time passwords, OTP, dramatically improve your chances of defense, and you all should install and deploy two-factor authentication, but they're not a panacea. In security, everything is about layers. So unfortunately, the attacker successfully passes that. Then the attacker goes in and goes into Gmail and deletes a message with the subject line, new device detected. This would be similar to the one that Gumi showed earlier, the blue message. They might delete because the legitimate user would otherwise see it on his or her phone and potentially be alerted to the activity. So they go through and pull that out. Next, though, just a few minutes later, the user switches over to export all the contacts. And that is something that we do rarely. It's something that I can't think of the last time I've done. And combined with the anomaly at the login time is starting to make us somewhat suspicious. Then a few minutes after that, the user goes and sends a message with, let's say, a phishing URL, or sets a filter to block any replies. This is, if your account gets attacked, people might try to write back and say, you've been attacked, and so they'll filter that out. Or maybe download a file here where our data loss prevention systems are saying it's a sensitive-looking file. And based upon any of these, the system goes to red, shuts them down, and serves up a real-time notification saying there's been suspicious activity detected in your account, and we've terminated sessions, and we're asking for side channel confirmation from the user. This is one of the first and one of the most effective real-time automatic defenses that we have in place, and enables us, as we said before, to get real-time feedback from users. As Gumi was mentioning, this is sent not only as email, but increasingly we're sending them as native push notifications, which have much, much higher response rates from users, and also are much more difficult to be faked, to be sent by a duplicitous actor. So if you're on Android, it pops up there. Yeah. If you're using the Gmail app on iOS, it pops up there, and we're continuing to add to that surface.
Yeah, and in addition to that, you also, when you get an email notification, it's very easy for the hijacker to actually go into your email and delete those notifications. So even if you're off, across the world on your legitimate device, they can hide that from you. But if you're getting the device notification, they actually can't do anything to remove that from your device.
That's right. We've been doing various of these notifications for several years. This particular one, certainly more than a year. Is that right, Yaron? Yep, certainly more than a year. False positives, we don't publish numbers there because they are stochastically determined based on different domains and different user behavior. So it will depend. From an enterprise standpoint, if most of your users tend to log in from headquarters, then false positive rate could be incredibly small because when they're out, that is always anomalous. If, on the other hand, you run a global sales fleet with people moving around, that's something where we might tolerate slightly higher false positives. And again, these are continually calibrated and configured based upon the risk profile. So this is one step. This is some of the automatic defenses. The next is actually in our Chrome browser. And earlier this morning, Google made a very exciting announcement, which is we rolled out Chrome version 68 that now labels sites as not secure when they don't support encryption. Now, encryption not directly connected to the problems we're talking about here, but for a lazy fisherman, a person who's fishing for a site and hasn't bothered to put SSL, this would show up. And maybe more importantly, it is just general security best practice for understanding when sites are coming over a secure connection and when they're relaying out information that could be intercepted. But that's not the only point on Chrome. Actually, one of the most valuable pieces that, and a step you can take manually, is to install our password alert extension. Here we have a short link, g.co/passwordalert. What password alert does is it sits there passively and quietly in the Chrome browser, making sure that if you ever type in a Google password on a site that is not Google, it will immediately alert the administrators. It'll immediately help shut down that account and secure your activity. This is tremendously simple and tremendously powerful, so there's really no reason not to install it as soon as you get back to your desk. Question? The extension knows a hash of your password, and it's working with Google, so it's synchronizing with the Google servers to see if you ever accidentally type that in. And confession to make, plenty of very sophisticated people have done that before. It immediately locks down the account and secures you from any further activity. The next piece, though, is something that we've talked about a bunch, including in both Diane and Prabhakar's keynotes this morning, and that's some technology called security key. People generally heard about some familiarity, not as much as I'd like, so here's what we're going to do. We'll walk through. So the best part about security key is that it's a physical device that takes that step 2 problem out of the equation. As we mentioned before, where this deceptive site process breaks down is the user is the one who's asked to view and verify that it's the real site. And as I showed you with EvilGenX and other examples, it is very difficult for humans to do that. And because of the attacker-defender asymmetry, they get to keep trying until you fall for it, and you have to be 100% perfect, or you will eventually fall for it. So what security key does is just switch that line a little bit. So instead of the human looking at this site and saying, like it's kind of pink, but maybe that's my monitor, and the buttons seem generally right, but I'm in a hurry, I think it's okay. Now, the security key, this small device that communicates with your browser directly by either USB, NFC, or Bluetooth, does the verification, and does so in a cryptographically secure way where it verifies, is this the site that I know, yes or no? And should I pass my secret key material, yes or no? That's something that then is, from a cryptographically proven standpoint, not defeatable through visual tricks. You can make that site look as convincing as you want. You can make that URL as close as you want to the real one, but unless it is truly exactly the same origin that that key was issued on, security key is going to detect that and stop this from going any further. USB keys have been owned for a long time. What would stop someone from making a duplicate? Two things happening here. One is that this is not just a USB key that is storing information, it's actually a security device, and it's built as special purpose hardware, so it has a very, very narrow attack surface. It's proprietary chips or it's certified chips. It's working in a very enclosed environment that makes it, technically it should be impossible for someone to extract the secret key material from it. The second piece to point out, though, is that the exchange protocol is not, there were some older devices that had a similar form factor that just pretended to be a keyboard. You'd tap the disk and it would just type in your password. That is still just as susceptible to phishing as you typing it. You might have a longer password, but it doesn't matter when the key's doing the work for you. What this does instead is communicate directly with the browser and to do a key exchange that's taking place there, so you have secure transport that's passing the information. So earlier at Enigma, this gentleman received a kit like the one I'm about to show that had a security key, worked for his personal account. He wasn't able to set it up for his G Suite Enterprise account. What are we doing about that? So introducing the Advanced Protection Program. Security keys are so strong and so robust, I'll pay you afterwards, thank you very much, Yeah, you get 2 prizes. There you go. So security keys so strong and in so many ways change the game by providing both dramatically increased security and, I'd argue, dramatically improved usability because you're not memorizing some 20-letter capital lowercase symbol password. You can now rely on the hardware to do that. That we've made them one of the centerpieces of what we call the Advanced Protection Program. We rolled out the Advanced Protection Program just around this time last year as a special offering for the highest risk users that we deal with. Activists, journalists, political figures, dissidents, people who, for whatever reasons, might have either outsized risk of attack or outsized impact should they've been attacked. And Advanced Protection really dials everything up on Google to the highest point. First, it focuses on security keys, which I just mentioned. In fact, they are required for login. Secondly, it limits the number of third-party apps that can access information to stop from accidental sharing or passing sensitive information to a less trusted piece of software, let's say an open source mail client that we haven't been able to verify. And third, it dials up security in product, doing things like deep scanning of email attachments. As Gumi mentioned, attachments are a vulnerability, and sometimes tipping those optional settings that you listed to the more secure setting. Now, this is a product that we've been very happy with, and we've seen very good uptick from some of these most high-risk users. And in fact, the security key portion is what's in the kit that I was handing out earlier, and will now hand out to my helpful questioner here. We have these elsewhere at Cloud Next, and so you can all go and find information about it. And if you go to this link, g.co Advanced Protection, I'm finally answering your question, which is it will lead to how you configure these comparable settings within G Suite for Enterprise. Right now, for consumer accounts, for individual accounts, you can do this one-step authentication and enrollment here, and then protect your account. And this is something we definitely recommend even for enterprise users who increasingly find that their personal accounts are under attack just like their business ones. But it also has step-by-step instructions to configure these same settings within G Suite for Enterprise and to allow you to get those same protections for all of your employees, or at least for your highest security employees like domain administrators, VIPs, executives. It is worth, yes, one question here. Sorry, the question was, is it only for enterprise or for business as well? I meant enterprise in a lowercase e setting. You can do security key enforcement for all the different SKUs, all the different price points of G Suite. And in fact, that's where I was leading to just now, which is we even have a product that starts out at free, which is our identity-only product. So Google Identity as a Service, our Google Identity product, rolled out about 5 or 6 months ago and begins at 0 for you to start migrating users into Google secure environment and benefit from many of the defenses that we've been talking about today. What this means is that you can benefit from the identity-focused features of the security I just talked about, even if you're not yet ready to move your email hosting or your documents and Drive collaboration onto Google. And then if and when you do that, it's a smooth transition from the further point on. So with the identity SKU, you can also do things such as security key enforcement and locking down on some of these other side channels and additional access methods. So with that, what we really wanted to do was to close and to say, if nothing else, here's the 3 points that we wanted you to remember and to take away when you go back to your offices on Monday morning and can start putting some of these steps in place. The first is to enable these additional challenges. As I said before, we would like to stop all suspicious transactions at that login moment if we can. The best way to help us do that is give us additional confirmation that we can ask for, whether it is an employee ID, a phone number, a directly connected Google phone with the prompt set up, or any of the other options up to and including security key. Also, as part of Enable Challenges, is to turn off, if at all possible, or for as many users for whom you can, turn off that less secure apps option. When that's in the on state, it means that somebody who knows a username and password has many options and opportunities to try to log in through programmatic interfaces like an old-fashioned mail client. So most domains we found turned this on because they had some users on Outlook version 2008 and they didn't want to upgrade them. I recognize it's difficult and enterprise change management is hard, but as much as possible, if you can kick people out of that and limit this setting by OUs that matter, it'll dramatically improve. I was asking, we overlooked DKIM and SPF. For people who don't know, DKIM, domain keys identified mail. It's a cryptographic authentication of messages to prove that they're coming from the domain they say they're from. And SPF, the sender policy framework, ties email messages to the IP address that they originated from, again, trying to prove the authenticity and origin. We skipped over because we had only 50 minutes here, and so we wanted to focus on a few things. These are definitely beneficial, and they can be quite helpful in phishing, particularly when combined with the user interface Gumi showed, that big yellow box, because that box is really saying, this message might look like it's coming from someone you know, but it's not exactly who you know. It's coming from the CEO with a typo in the name, or it's coming from something close to your company name, but not the real one. That authentication allows us to have true, robust signals there to work on it. And so that's actually goes in the green circle. It's one of the advanced settings that we strongly recommend that you look at and pay attention to. As Gumi mentioned, we're continually migrating settings from the sort of opt-in to unsecure by default, and these will continue to move that direction. But for any of you, particularly if you feel under attack or if you have subpopulations that are at risk, enabling those settings is tremendously helpful. And third, last but not least, is security keys. As Prabhakar mentioned this morning and has been picked up by a lot of press over the last 24 hours, since Google started using security keys for all of our employees, we have had no successful password phishing, no successful login breaches due to the security that is intrinsic in them. And Prabhakar mentioned this morning of G Suite customers who've rolled them out, likewise, no breaches. It's very rare in security to get an actual 0, and so we strongly recommend. We have a lot of free-spirited, self-righteous engineers working at our company who want to be able to browse any site in the web, and also our mission is to organize the world's information, so our spiders are constantly crawling every page out there. So we don't block it. What we found is that by bringing that perimeter in closer and saying, let's secure around the authentication, let's secure around the crown jewels, we get much better security without impeding people's ability to do work.
Right now, there's actually, if you do click on the link, once you go there, there are instructions you can look at, which are individual features that emulate what's going on with advanced protection, but on the G Suite side. So you can turn on OAuth whitelisting, blacklisting, and then you can also use security key management. Now, that is a temporary hold. Like later, very soon, we actually will be rolling out a full-fledged version of advanced protection, but for G Suite, where you don't have to turn on things automatically. You can actually opt into the program. Okay, but for now, I do recommend that you go ahead and turn on the individual features. And again, you'll see the instructions if you do click on that link.
My clock up here says we have 11 seconds to remain, so I'm going to wrap up here, but we'll be available afterwards. We'll move to the hall if people have follow-up questions. So with that, I really wanted to thank you very much for your time, to remind you that attacks are much, much more targeted than we ever think about or see on TV. They require, therefore, a combination of the automatic defenses we have and these steps we've laid out here that you each can take on your own domains.
Yep.
Thank you very much.